everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. In today's video, I'm going to give you my power rankings after week one of the NFL season. And wow, what a crazy week it has been in the NFL. Now, doing these rankings, it was pretty difficult because although I don't want to overreact to just week one, and we know that crazy things happen in week one, but this is really all we have to go on so far for the 2023 season. So compared to my previous power rankings, which I'll put the link in the description, there are going to be some pretty significant changes. So I hope you'll check it out. Hope you like the video, and let's get into it. As usual, you guys, how I'm going to do this video is I'm going to give you my bottom 3 teams and also my top 10 teams on either end of the spectrum there. What I'm also going to do is throw in a few honorable mentions. But we start off with the bottom 3, and today will be no different. So coming in at number 30, third from the bottom, are going to be the Houston Texans. Now, CJ Stroud was pretty solid in his debut in the NFL. Look, the Houston Texans somewhat still devoid of talent. I like some of the additions that they made, but they're at least another year or two away from seriously competing. The struggle, though, is they didn't have any run game. Now, I'm a big fan of Dameon Pierce. Thought he was a really good pick by the Texans last year, but really just not involved at all in the game. And here's the thing, though, and here's what this team is going to build their identity on, and it's good, solid defense. DeMeco Ryans their head coach. Will Anderson, their high draft pick, he got a sack. I think the defense will get better as the season goes on, but if they're going to win some games this year, you're going to have to rely on the defense, and maybe CJ Stroud can make some big plays. Now, coming in now at number 31 overall in my power rankings, it's going to be the Carolina Panthers. Now, somewhat similarly to the Houston Texans, number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young debut, not so great. But the good news for the Carolina Panthers is their run game was actually pretty solid. Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, they both ran the ball pretty effectively, which is something that's going to help out the development of a guy like Bryce Young. Now, when you look at them defensively, they really did struggle to hold down the Atlanta Falcons. This Falcons team does have a lot of weapons to deal with, so not an easy task. But the one thing which I will say in favor of the Carolina Panthers is that Brian Burns is a beast. 1.5 sacks in the week 1 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. If they can't sign him to a long-term deal, don't be surprised if a team throws a first-round pick Carolina's way to try at the trade deadline to get Brian Burns. Maybe a competing team, maybe the 49ers, we shall see. Now coming in at number 32 overall, and this would be unchanged from last week's or whenever I did the power rankings last, and that's going to be the Arizona Cardinals. Now, granted, the Cardinals kept that game really close with the Washington Commanders through most of the game, but this is just a team that I think is going to be not good moving forward. They did play better than some other teams in week 1, but this is somewhat of they didn't look great week 1, and this was probably one of their more winnable games, and I just don't think moving forward they're going to do a whole lot. Josh Dobbs, fairly ineffective. Run game, okay. The one thing which you do have to say in favor of the Arizona Cardinals, and maybe somewhat the scheme of Jonathan Gannon, is that their pass rush was really effective. 6 sacks on the day against the Washington Commanders, who have an okay offensive line. But overall, I think it's going to be a long season out in the desert for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, there were a couple of teams I do want to mention as an honorable mention who very easily could have been in the bottom 3. First team is going to be the Denver Broncos, losing at home to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders are a team who I'm not very high on. Jimmy Garoppolo played pretty well. Their defense really did a solid job. But Denver losing at home week 1, not a great start to the Sean Payton era there. Couple of other teams who very easily could have made the bottom 3. Indianapolis Colts. I thought Anthony Richardson, probably one of the better looking rookie quarterbacks out there in week 1, but still has a ways to go. And that team really just missing Jonathan Taylor. It is one of those things where I think that they really just need to figure that situation out, because Jonathan Taylor's still a very good young player. Of course, he wants to be paid like the player that he is, and it would be ideal for Anthony Richardson to have a guy like Jonathan Taylor just helping him out and just establishing the offense, but not really to be. Another thing, too, is with the Colts is that, look, Division game at home, you lose it by 10. Not ideal, but I think they can bounce back and do a little bit better. Overall, a little bit better than what I thought. The last honorable mention here is going to be the Washington Commanders. Look, they barely scraped a win at home against the team who I think is the worst in the NFL. Not a great start to the season. Sam Howell was meh. I really was expecting a little bit more of a dominant performance by the Washington Commanders. However, it is week one. Arizona, albeit I think the worst team in the league, they can definitely throw a few different things. You don't really know what to expect when there's a new coaching staff. Think back to last year when the 49ers went to the Chicago Bears week one. Matt Eberflus, the head coach there, in his first game. Sometimes the team just really gets up for it for the first game under a new coaching scheme and regime. But, close game. Washington does get the win, but still something to look at there. They didn't impress me one bit. Coming up next, you guys, I'm going to have my top 10 teams in the NFL for my week one power rankings. Now, but before we get into that, let's go over a couple of honorable mentions for teams who very could have easily made the top 10, but this week they did not. So the first team, it's going to be the New York Jets. Really nice win over the Buffalo Bills. However, Aaron Rodgers, it's been confirmed he is done for the year. Zach Wilson coming in didn't look very good at all. That was all defense, all special teams that held it down. Plus, Garrett Wilson with a ridiculous touchdown catch. I do think the Jets may end up having a pretty solid record, but losing Aaron Rodgers and just going from Rodgers to Zach Wilson, just such a massive downgrade. Can Zach Wilson improve as he gets more playing time? Well, that remains to be seen. A couple of other teams that should have made it or could have made it are the Buffalo Bills. They are out of my top 10. Josh Allen looked dreadful. 3 bad interceptions, a fumble, a team, the Jets, they lose their quarterback on the 4th play of their game and they somehow lose it. It's just really poor performance by the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen just continuing to be a turnover machine, not ideal. The other two teams I want to mention, the LA Chargers, very close to beating the Miami Dolphins. That was a fantastic game, maybe the game of the week that you could easily argue. The other team that just missed it or is in the conversation for a top 10 are the Green Bay Packers, actually. Jordan Love looked really, really good. I thought he was solid, and he was missing number 1 receiver Christian Watson. The defense held down Justin Fields, and the Bears offense, we heard all offseason how Justin Fields was going to take the next step and, maybe in the MVP discussion, and he looked anything but that in week one at home against the Packers. So the Packers knocking on the door for the top 10. Now let's move into my top 10 teams. And coming in at number 10, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals looked really, really bad in week one. Worse, arguably, than Buffalo, worse than the Jets, worse than the number of other teams. However, I just have a lot more faith maybe in the Cincinnati Bengals to turn it around really, really quickly. And they can do with a big matchup week 2, I believe is against the division rival Baltimore Ravens. Joe Burrow just looked out of sorts in this first game. He didn't really play much, in terms of training camp, preseason. This was kind of maybe like his preseason this week 1. Not ideal, but I think they can turn it around. I like the Bengals defense. They really did a good job holding Deshaun Watson, below 200 passing yards. And I just think the offense will get rolling, just a matter of time. But look, you can make arguments for other teams. But to me right now, Cincinnati at number 10. Moving on to number 9, and I'm going to have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Look, week 1 on the road, division matchup. Crazy things can happen. They got it done. They made it happen. 31-21 win over the Indianapolis Colts. Trevor Lawrence looked pretty solid numbers. Run game, definitely a bit of a struggle right there. You'd like to see ETN and those guys do a little bit better against a defense like the Colts, which I think is pretty okay. But overall, if you look at the Jaguars defense, Josh Allen, what a monster. 3 sacks on the day, and he was one of the big, turning forces in that game, and he could go on and have a just massive season for the Jaguars. Now, coming in at number 8, and you could maybe argue they should be higher, are the Detroit Lions. Man, what a massive win on Thursday Night Football to kick off the season, going into Kansas City and getting the win there. The offense looked pretty darn good, and that doesn't even count having Jameson Williams. He'll be back after 6 weeks. That's going to be a massive upgrade to their offense, but they were able to move the ball effectively. The other thing too, the defense looked pretty darn good. I thought Aiden Hutchinson, really nice game. Brian Branch, their rookie player, pick 6, super impressive. I think the Lions are probably the class of the NFC North for now. I'm really looking forward to whenever the Lions play the Packers. That should be a great game. But Detroit, if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you got to be really excited about this team moving forward. They are absolutely moving in the right direction. Now coming in at number 7, I'm going to have the Miami Dolphins. They go to LA, which is almost a home game for Miami because we know how Chargers fans are. Sorry, but it's true. Charger fans, sorry to say it. But the Dolphins, Tua, amazing. 466 yards passing, touchdowns. Tyreek Hill looks unguardable. There are a couple of flaws in their team. The run game really couldn't get a whole lot going. You'd like to see a bit more from a guy like Raheem Mostert. As a Niner fan, I know what he's capable of. You'd like to see more out of him. The defense, look, they actually did a pretty solid job holding Justin Herbert in terms of the passing game, but the run defense, not good at all. They're going to need to fix that, and I think a guy like Vic Fangio, their new defensive coordinator, he will get that sorted out. But don't be surprised if maybe the Dolphins are a team that look to trade for maybe someone on the D-line or a linebacker who can eventually help shore up that run defense. But a big win going into LA and beating the Chargers week 1. Now coming in at number 6, and this might be a surprise, but I have the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns at number 6. Before the season, and I think it's fair that anyone would say, the Cincinnati Bengals were one of the AFC favorites to come out of the AFC and represent them in the Super Bowl. Cleveland at home absolutely shut them down. 24-3 win over rivals Cincinnati, Ohio in-state rivals, and just a massive performance. Nick Chubb was unstoppable in that game. The defense looked really, really good, and they have a lot of great players all across their defense. Adding Zadarius Smith, Myles Garrett, a monster. Denzel Ward looking pretty healthy, doing a really good job in that game. Martin Emerson, one of my favorite young players in the NFL in the secondary, and they just look like a really good football team. Remember, not that long ago, Kevin Stefanski was head coach of the year in the NFL. I think the Browns, if they can figure out their passing offense a little more, then they could be a massive threat and one of those teams that goes from worst to first. Don't be shocked if it happens. Now coming up next, you guys, I'm going to have my top 5 teams. Coming in at number 5, we're going to have the Baltimore Ravens, another AFC North team back to back. I thought the Ravens just had a really good, solid win week 1, at home against a not great team in the Houston Texans, but it's one of those things where when you have a new coaching staff in Houston, you just never really know what to expect. Maybe they'll try some funky things like fake punts, what have you, but they did a solid job right there. The one concern, Lamar Jackson throwing the football. It took a little while to get things going. I do think that's going to improve a lot more as the season goes on, especially getting tight end Mark Andrews, who, as we all know, is Lamar Jackson's favorite just safety blanket weapon, one of the best tight ends in the game. Getting him back is going to be huge for Lamar, huge for that offense. What's not good for the offense is J.K. Dobbins is out for the year. However, I think if there's any position in the NFL that you can replace with some easiness, I think it's going to be the running back position. There are still a number of good free agents out there. Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, those guys are, I think, more than capable of holding it down for the time being. So we'll see what happens there. But Baltimore's defense looked really, really good. Gotta like what they're doing there in Baltimore. Really well coached by John Harbaugh. And I do think the offense will get better, getting Mark Andrews back, and then just, getting Lamar Jackson more comfortable with Odell Beckham and rookie Zay Flowers, who ended up having a really solid game. So I think this Ravens team is going to be a complete team, and they're going to be really, really tough. They have a big matchup coming up against Cincinnati, so that will be a huge test to see where they're really at. But for now, I have them as my number 5 team. Coming up at number 4, we're going to have the Kansas City Chiefs dropping down in my rankings. Look, naturally so. You lose your home opener against the Detroit Lions, you're going to move down in the rankings. Patrick Mahomes actually looked human considering he didn't have Travis Kelce and there's a number of other weapons who were no longer in Kansas City, but he looked okay. I think he looked fine, a couple of mistakes, but Kadarius Toney had maybe the worst game ever for a wide receiver, and that didn't help things out. But here's the thing, Travis Kelce is going to be back very soon, maybe week 2. Chris Jones signed to a 1-year deal. He, in my opinion, is their best defensive player. You get your best defensive player, you get your best weapon, and I think Kansas City is going to turn it around big time in week 2. Expect a massive bounce back game from Patrick Mahomes. But as of right now, Kansas City have moved down to the number 4 spot in my rankings. Don't be surprised to see them in the top 3 next week if they can get a big win. Now coming in at number 3, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. I had them number 1 in my power rankings before the season. They went into New England week 1, which is not an easy thing to do. You have Bill Belichick, he has all this time to prep for your team, and you still get the win, 25-20. It was a very solid win. Jalen Hurts put up okay numbers. The run game was okay. The defense was solid. Eventually, Mac Jones did put up some pretty solid numbers against them. But look, Darius Slay, big play Slay, 70-yard interception return. Even though the score was close, it did kind of feel like Philadelphia were in control for most of the game, or pretty much the entire game. You always felt like they were going to pull it out. But compared to some of the other teams who are going to be mentioned up next, their win just wasn't as impressive to me. And then coming in at number 2, a win which was incredibly impressive, the Dallas Cowboys, 40-0 over a division rival on the road. That is insane. The Cowboys didn't really have to do much in terms of with Dak Prescott. Didn't throw the ball a ton. When he did, he was efficient, picked up first downs, did what he needed to do. But the run game, phenomenal. Tony Pollard, 2 touchdowns. He's going to have just a massive year. But let's talk about this defense. You shut out the New York Giants. Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, they have some weapons. They bring in Darren Waller. They have some decent receivers over there. And they were absolutely shut out. 40-0. They had a number of guys with sacks all over the place. Dorrance Armstrong, a number of guys looking really, really good. I think this is a massive building block for the Dallas Cowboys. And I think that them and the Eagles, they're going to be in a dogfight for the NFC East all season long, just like last year, but maybe even more competitively this year, which is just crazy to think about. That's going to be I can't wait for those matchups. Dallas, Philadelphia, it's going to be fireworks, absolute fireworks. Now my number 1 team, and look, call me a homer, call me biased, say what you will, but I have the San Francisco 49ers going into Pittsburgh. Incredibly well-coached team by Mike Tomlin, and a team that has talent on offense, on defense. You look at the offense, Najee Harris, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, defensively, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cameron Hayward, really good players on both sides of the ball. The Niners went in there and absolutely dominated them. For the first 28 minutes of this game, it was 20-0. The Steelers eventually get a drive going at the end of the half, somewhat helped by Deommodore Lenoir, a couple of penalties against him on that drive. But besides that, it was just pure domination by the 49ers. Coming into the year, I think if you looked at the 49ers, a couple of question marks. Brock Purdy, Steve Wilks at defensive coordinator, and then right tackle Colton McKivitz. Brock Purdy looked incredibly comfortable running the offense, making the right reads, making plays when he needed to, and just showing off his athleticism and his just mastery of this Kyle Shanahan offense. Incredibly impressive. Then you look at the second question mark, Steve Wilks taking over for DeMeco Ryans. How was he going to look? The defense looked amazing. Up until the first 5 drives that the Pittsburgh Steelers had, they didn't even have a first down. And we had multiple turnovers, 5 sacks on the day if I'm not mistaken, and just a great overall performance by the defense, led by defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. Then right tackle Colton McKivitz. That is still a question mark, no doubt about that. TJ Watt, 3 sacks on the day, while Colton McKivitz was covering him. Not ideal, but that you could chalk it up to. It's week 1, you're on the road, and you're going up against one of the best in the NFL. I do think as McKivitz gets more snaps, gets more playing time, he'll get better. He hasn't played a whole ton in his career, but that's still the one remaining question mark, which is your right tackle. That's your one question mark you have. It could be a lot worse. Probably the most complete team in the NFL as of right now are the 49ers. And that is going to do it, you guys, for my power rankings. I really do hope you enjoyed these rankings. Let me know in the comments below whether you agree with me or disagree with me. Please drop some comments below. We can get a good discussion going there. I've done a lot of changes in this week 1 rankings, but that's just the nature of the NFL. Things change really, really quickly. But I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like on it. Feel free to share it all over social media. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do, because it really does help me out. And stay tuned for more videos this week. And before I go, guys, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.